Hey everyone, my name is Paige Thompson. I work as a mental health consultant, and so I get the privilege today of talking with you about staff self-care. And as we think about this, I think it's helpful for you to know that this would be a workshop that 5 years ago, I personally, maybe 10 years ago, I personally would have avoided because self-care is what, especially then, was very, very hard for me to want to attend to. So I think it's helpful for you to know that, because sometimes, at least for me, when I'd go to self-care workshops, I felt like, oh, it's going to be the same thing. They're going to tell me to take care of myself, and I don't have time for that. And I guess if you're that person, I see you. I resonate with you, and there is another side to this. And I hope that you'll come with me on this journey. And maybe some of you are already practicing super great self-care, and that's wonderful too. I'm just glad you're here. So my name is Paige Thompson. I have my master's in social work from the University of South Dakota and my bachelor's from Augustana University. I worked about 5 years as a school social worker, working with pre-K to 12th grade, and then worked several years as a mental health consultant, as well as doing private practice therapy and doing therapy in an inpatient psychiatric facility. So I work as a mental health consultant now, doing a lot of training, and then also doing psychological evaluations for a residential treatment facility. So all that to say that I've worked with a lot of really challenging things, a lot of very sad things, and self-care could not be more important when it comes to the ability to continue to function in the world that we live in, both professionally and personally. So this is a team that I get the honor of working with at my job at Southwest West Central Service Co-op. So I'm going to ask you actually to go ahead and type this into your web browser. So you'll see it's pollev.com. And then you'll enter in, so open up another, whatever browser you use, Internet Explorer, Chrome, whatever it is, and type this in. It's going to prompt you to enter this Paige Thompson 0706. And so I'm going to pull this up. You'll see this here too.
And just a note, we've discovered on the last one, it's Paige Thompson. So that's an O and then 706.
Oh,
so
okay.
in case you're mistyping it, that might be what happened. So Paige Thompson almost, except for the N, and then 706.
Well, that does make it tricky. Thank you, Patsy. So in this one, we're just going to do one question here. I want you to use one word to describe your last week. Routine. That's nice. Unless it's a routine that's not helpful. Gratifying. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. And it's okay. You say whatever you feel, good or bad. It's okay. Yeah. Baffling. Good word choice. Probably a tough week. These are great though. Making it through. You're here. I mean, it's Friday. Long, tiring, overwhelming, exhausting, busy. I'm so glad you picked this session to come to. I really think it'll be a good way to end a week like that. I think it's helpful to take some time to reflect, the good and the bad. A lot of times at the end of the day, we think about like our to-dos, but it's interesting because we always do that. What didn't we do, right? That's where the mind goes. Well, what did I not achieve? and then your mind gets busy trying to organize how you're going to achieve it the next day. A switch to that would be, instead of thinking about the things you didn't do, what were the things you did achieve, right? So on this one word description, you're writing tiring, stressful, long, overwhelming. I'm guessing there were a lot of things you accomplished this week. So I just think it's helpful to be aware that you're doing a lot, and we often do not focus on that. So thank you for sharing that with me and for being present in that exercise. I should tell you that I welcome questions and comments. Patsy and Liddy will interrupt me as we go here if you have some questions. Our objectives today are to identify the benefits of self-care. We're going to reflect on your own self-care. You don't have to share them. Maybe you're doing awesome self-care, and maybe it's, more of like a C- or D level, and that's okay. We're gonna work on it. We're gonna learn strategies for promoting and practicing your self-care. I'm gonna get you started on creating like an actual action plan. Again, when I've gone to self-care presentations in the past, what has frustrated me at times is like, yes, I'm so passionate about self-care right now. And then it's next Tuesday. And so if I don't have like, in the past, if I didn't have like a practical methodology for like what I was actually going to apply to my life, then it just was kind of like great. And then it was gone. So I want the action plan to be something that you can engage with. So you can see a little bit what we're going to do. Benefits, stress. We're going to talk first about some stress. And to do this, I would like you to go ahead and go to the participant folder on Google Drive. And I know that Liddy had chatted about this as well. You will see on that folder, I've got this form here called lifestyle behaviors. And I know I'm asking you to look at a lot here. So thank you for bearing with me. If you are able to print this out, great. If not, because I don't have you for a lot of time, it may be faster for us to even just take a sheet of paper and write down whys and ends for yeses and nos here. So if you've got even just a notebook next to you and a pen, this is a lifestyle assessment. I'm going to take about 5 minutes to give you here. And in here, you're looking at an honest assessment of how well or poorly you take care of yourself. So if you want to take like a T chart and then just write on the first one your whys, and on the second one your whys and ends as you go through, you're going to just mark if you, yes or no, smoke or use tobacco when you're under stress, drink a lot of coffee, drink alcohol. I feel like you should be able to work through that with these instructions. If you're able to print it out and want to just go ahead and do it on paper and pen, that's fine too. However is easiest for you. I'm going to stop talking now and let you actually think about this here. Okay, that may not be enough time for you to get all the way through. I'm hoping that as you're looking at this, it's illuminating maybe a little bit of how you've been handling stress lately. I'll point out that a lot of people currently, with the studies they've done in the midst of the pandemic, have been watching a lot more TV, right? So the number of hours there are 3 to 4 hours per day. A lot of people have been engaging in more drinking. So that's been something that The pandemic has definitely increased that for many people. So just being aware of some of those areas. Certainly a lot has been talked about with overeating in the midst of the pandemic too. Hopefully you can kind of self-assess here and see, how did you do? Were there a lot of yeses in the negative self-care? Maybe there were a lot of yeses in the positive self-care. Certainly spending time with family and friends may look a little bit different right now, as people are finding what feels safest for them. But are you doing those things? Are you making time for those things?
Paige, we had an interesting comment in the chat. I'm not sure you saw it about withdrawing from people perhaps not always being a negative. Did you see that?
I didn't see that. That is so true.
Yeah, she writes, as an introvert, perhaps withdrawing from people is what she needs to recharge. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. It's absolutely true. So when we think about withdrawing being a negative, it would more be withdrawing in a sense that you're not engaging at all. So certainly when we see like people who are struggling with mental health challenges, or even kind of like bordering on that being a concern, withdrawing is a huge red flag. But as a self-care mechanism, withdrawing can be a very positive thing. There are many people who need to step back and use time by themselves to recharge. In fact, I would argue that extroverts even need that from time to time. Though as an extrovert myself, it is usually much less time than my introvert husband. So an awareness of that is hugely beneficial and a very good point. So thank you to whoever brought that up. So thinking a little bit, and feel free, like I said, chat, ask questions as we go through. I want it to be as engaging as possible for you. Stress is a normal response to situations, and stress can be very helpful in short-term situations. And it varies from person to person. Now, the stress in a pandemic has been a lot different. I mentioned like the changes they've seen with things like alcohol and eating. There's been a lot more persistent worry about your own health, of course, naturally, and the health of a loved one. There have been worsening chronic health problems because many people have been unable or unwilling or concerned to get the medical help they might need because of fear of their own health or risk of contracting COVID-19. So there's a lot of unique things that are happening in this last year that require us to be more aware of our own stress levels. You see impacts of stress. I know you all know this, so we're not going to take a lot of time to go through this, but the impact of stress is immense on our bodies, on our mood, our behavior. Engaging in relationships can be difficult at times when we are stressed. Our communication changes. The way that we engage with our day-to-day changes. So self-care is an intentional action that you do to care for your health. These practices are typically engaged in on a regular basis to reduce that stress and to maintain your well-being, or even enhance your well-being. I think it's very important to focus on the intentional aspect. Self-care doesn't just happen. And, many times that can be kind of a bummer for us because we're really busy. And so we think, well, I should feel better. I should have more energy, or I should be able to do this, or I should be able to do that. Or, why am I not as happy as I used to be, or as my neighbor is, or as this person is? Self-care requires a great deal of intentionality with how busy our lives are. So there does need to be a planning component to it. I want you to think for a moment here about your professional roles. And Patsy, interrupt me when I know we were going to do a breakout here at some point. Were we planning to break out here, or was it, I think it was maybe in a few minutes?
I have on slide 17. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what
perfect. Yep, that's perfect. So I'm just going to ask you to think about your professional roles and responsibilities. You don't have to write it down unless you want to, but that might feel a little bit like a to-do list. If you just think about it for a moment. Then you add on all of these and more. We have a lot. So So you have that professional role, but the responsibility doesn't end when you go home. You bring stress from your professional role. I, again, don't need to tell you this, but you bring stress from your professional role into your home life. And you also bring your home life stress into your professional role. One of my favorite self-care tips, which I didn't put into this presentation, but I'm really glad that I just thought of it. My coworker, a dear friend of mine who's a school counselor, her and I worked through responding to suicides, and we're dispersed into several districts providing support and counseling to teachers and to parents and to students following suicides. And her and I dealt with quite a bit. And at one point we determined that we would have a stop sign on our way home. And that stop sign would be a clear delineation in our mind where we would no longer allow, as best we could, what we did that day to come home. So I had a stop sign. I can see it clearly in my mind. When on the highway, I saw the stop sign and I said, I'm now going to go. It was still 15 minutes home for me, but I said, this is my point. So now I'm going to do the best that I can to let go of everything we went through today. Because if I walk into my home with the emotions that I have here, I'm not going to be able to do any of the things on this page. And so I think if I could just encourage you to have a stop sign, that would be something I would just very much encourage you to do as much as you can, to have some type of a stop sign where you say, like, on my way home. And I know right now, many of us are working from home. So for me, it might be the door out of this office. It might be that I have to do something differently before I go and engage with my children and my husband. So just being aware of that, I think there's an awful lot that you do and trying to find a balance in how you think about your roles. Okay, now I really do need you to have a pen and paper. So if you can just look around, make sure you grab, it doesn't matter what it looks like, just a scrap piece of paper and a pen.
A comment in the chat page.
Yeah.
I want to take a look about what our role is as far as assessing students' ability to do self-care. Or are you really speaking of how we can provide self-care just to ourselves as teachers?
Yeah, so I'm really encouraging self-care for yourself. But what I would say is anytime you are emulating, modeling self-care for your students, so let's say you're doing like deep breathing for yourself, and you're modeling that might be something a student could practice with you, or you could ask them about their favorite coping skills in self-care, and try and practice that with them. So the goal in this presentation is to focus on your own self-care. But if there are tools and tips that you can use to work with those that you work with, I would definitely encourage that as well. Great question.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
All right, you probably already started, some of you high achievers, on a Friday afternoon. I want you to list all the self-care activities you can. I'll give you a minute. I have 2 minutes on there. I'll give you a minute. Write them down on a piece of paper. Anything you can think of as a coping skill. Okay, hopefully you got a pretty good list going. I want you to go ahead and circle the self-care activities that you've actually done in the last 2 weeks. How'd you do? I hope you had some circled. I hope you had some written in the first place. I hope you're staying with me here. Cooking is one of my self-care regimens. It's not quite as enjoyable with my 3 kids sometimes, but I still think it's self-care. Things like reading, exercise, playing with my kids, being outside. Those are some of my self-care things. And for me, it's helpful to write and then circle, well, how am I actually practicing that? Did I actually do any of these things in the last 2 weeks? Did I do any of these things in the last week? We're going to take, Patsy, will you remind me? I think would 5 minutes be okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So maybe I'll give them 5 minutes in a group and then
Yep.
a minute to come back.
Perfect.
Are you ready, or do you want to give more instruction there?
Yeah. So in your small groups, I just want you to introduce yourself and then just share how this activity worked for you. If there are some self-care activities that you do that are helpful, you can share that in your small groups. I mainly want you to just talk about what did you have written? Are there ones circled for you? Do you share different ideas and activities with those in your small group? So just take 5 minutes and kind of debrief this activity, and we'll meet back here.
All right, you'll see a little join button that you'll need to click in just a moment. Thanks.
Probably told you that you will be going into those small breakout rooms again with that same group. So it's kind of nice. You'll be connecting with them shortly. As you come back, make sure that you turn off your video on your webcam there too. Perfect. Thank you all. Okay, so let's look at what self-care is. We're going to look at a couple different areas: physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, social, and professional. It helps when you kind of break it out like that, because self-care as a whole can feel a little bit overwhelming, all encompassing. So I think it's helpful to break it out and then think, okay, how am I doing in this area of self-care? So let's look at the first one. Well, we'll talk a little bit more, I guess, about self-care in general. I feel like we've done this, but the overall goal is enhancing our well-being. We talked about stress. We're going to try and manage that stress and reduce it. I guess one thing I would point out is that for each of us, this process of thinking more about our own self-care is going to look different. Some of you may have a great routine for yourselves already, but you're maybe looking to tweak certain areas, kind of looking at maybe some different healthy practices you could integrate. Others of you are like, what is she even talking about? I don't know what self-care means at all, and that's totally fine. So we're just going to try and get started in thinking about how that might look for each of you by going through each of the categories. It is good to know that self-care is not self-indulgence. There's a lot of sayings that sort of go along with self-care, like putting your mask on, like in the airplane, putting your oxygen mask on first so you can help other people. And it's important to do that. It is important to take time for yourself. It's not self-indulgent. It doesn't mean that you only care about yourself. It doesn't make you selfish, not at all. In order for you to do what you want to do, both professionally and personally, there has to be some time for yourself. And that's a really hard one to wrap your head around, I think, especially in your personal life. But it may be that way for you in your professional life too. So it may be difficult with certain relationships. Like if you have kids, it may be difficult for you to say, I'm going to engage in self-care because you think you need to do X, Y, and Z with them. Or it could be that way with your adult parents or siblings, whatever it is. Necessary for you to avoid burnout for sure. And we're going to talk more about that. Burnout is the exhaustion of physical or emotional strength. It's usually the result of prolonged stress. I'm going to guess that a lot of you have heard the term burnout. Many of you have probably felt burnout, this sense of just I can't do anything else. I'm overwhelmed. I'm exhausted. A lot of people have felt this burnout in the last year with the pandemic, just watching a lot of news and connecting with people over technology because it's one of the only ways that we can. And so just feeling very exhausted can be a component, just even with pandemic life, outside of all our other responsibilities. You may also have heard of compassion fatigue. This is a state experienced by those who are helping people in distress. So this essentially means you take on the emotional pain of others. It's this extreme state of tension, almost becoming like obsessed with those you are helping. And the problem with that is that like there's never a break for someone. They're constantly going. They just can't really ever get over this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness because of someone else's distress. And you may notice this if you haven't seen this. I would just encourage you to think about burnout and compassion fatigue. Sometimes you'll see it in your coworkers. They just can't talk about anything else besides like that negative thing that's going on. And it's just like kind of, this hamster wheel. We're going to talk a little bit about ruminating here too. But you can't really get over what's happening. It's just like you're stuck. That becomes apparent if you're not engaging in self-care. Depression is an epidemic. 15% of people in the United States will become clinically depressed at some point in their life. What we're seeing right now is that the age of a depressive episode continues to decrease. And so you have individuals going through depressive episodes much earlier than it used to be. And when we look at the costs for a society, depression is immense. It's a huge burden on society, lost wages, the relationships. We look at suicide, hospitalizations. There's an enormous burden. And I bring up depression because a lot of times when an individual is not engaging in self-care, there are greater risks for things like depression or burnout or compassion fatigue. So we want to be preventative. I also bring this up because it's such a high population that has depression that it's a unique thing. If you're struggling with depression, it's even more important, imperative that you do seek out and engage in self-care. And I mentioned ruminating, that hamster wheel. So on average, our minds are lost in thought 47% of the time. 47% of the time. So you're thinking deeply about something, obsessing over it. It doesn't make you a part of the solution. It just makes you a part of the problem. So when we ruminate, it's just very difficult to think about anything else. And when someone is in the midst of that ruminating, when they're thinking about like, let's say it's a particular stressor at work, like a change in something, and then they can't think about anything else. They just think, oh, why do we have to do it this way? We didn't used to have to do it this way. And there's never going to be, this and this, and this just constant negative. It's so difficult for someone who is ruminating to see outside of that. And it's very damaging to our health if we don't ever get a break from it. I will point out here, since we're talking about it, a 2-minute distraction in the midst of ruminating is enough to find a break. It's enough to find a reprieve. So if you ever find yourself just stuck like that, take 2 minutes and do something different, like a walk. You can even put a timer on your microwave. I liked a microwave or a stove because if you're ruminating and you put a timer on your phone, it's very easy to kind of just like go into something else and your mind continues to spiral. But set a timer, get outside, do something for 2 minutes. If you can't do that, then if you're kind of lost in thoughts like this, another act of self-care is actually trying to think about a solution and trying to pour that mental energy into the solution part of it instead of the problem. And Patsy, you'll have to interrupt me if we have any questions.
I don't see any. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So as we think about some of the benefits of self-care, for one, I would just point out avoiding things like burnout, compassion fatigue, trying to improve your mental health. Those are clear benefits of self-care. There's also improved health, physical health improved by self-care. You see things like individuals who have chronic illnesses having improved symptoms with their illnesses because of engaging in practices of self-care. Fostering resilience, improved immune system, a higher self-esteem, living longer, better equipped to manage stress, an increase in productivity, an increase in job satisfaction, and it changes the culture of work. So, I mean, these are just a few things. Living longer and having a higher self-esteem, improving your immune system. If you can do those things by simple acts of self-care, I think it's worthwhile. I'm going to have you go to the self-assessment form found in the Google Drive. So let's, I'll show you what one that looks like. And I believe we were going to take a few minutes here for a small group as well after we talk about it. Is that right, Patsy?
Yeah, that was the plan. We
Okay.
got a direct link to this doc that Lydia just put in the chat. So, and it's so helpful for you to have it on the screen there too for folks who maybe are working from a smaller device or don't have the ability to have multiple things open. So thanks for that.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say about this. I want you to just take a few minutes, and it's okay to do this with your groups. I would encourage you later, if you don't mind, because I know we don't have a ton of time and we're going to talk about a lot. I just want you to get a sense of some of the tools in this document, some of the things that are here. You see like emotional self-care, spiritual self-care. If you're not able to print this out, that's okay. But if you might just have it up so that you can talk with your group. In your groups, I want you to just talk through, like, maybe you want to talk about physical self-care as a group and just say, like, how are people doing with this? What does it mean? How are people actually engaging in things like eating regularly, eating healthy? We're just going to take probably a few minutes just because I know time is short, like 5 minutes. If your group would take 5 minutes, pick one category to talk through, and just so any category you want, and just talk through like how it's going for your group within that category. Yeah, Liddy, will you put up the link for this document? Or maybe you already did.
All right,
Yeah, I got
ready
the
to
folder again. I will find, what's the name of this one again, please?
Yep.
self-care assessment.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
So we'll
I've got
just
that
give
one
her a
here.
moment to get that up into the chat for folks who want to have it up in front of them. And then again, as Paige just said, as we put you into groups, the task is just to choose one of those categories to chat about for a few minutes. Thanks, Liddy. And we'll go ahead and, are we ready, Paige? Yep, okay.
Yep.
All right, I'm giving people 5 minutes in those rooms. You'll be in the same rooms you were before.
Make sure you turn off your video as you come back. I hope you all had a good discussion. I hope this form can be something that you can use as a self-assessment for yourself, not just now, but in the days and weeks to come. It's something to look at, not only for ideas or for assessment, but also for ideas. You know, what are some things you could be doing in certain areas to build forth some better self-care? And ultimately just to feel better, to enjoy life, to feel happier, to feel less stress. So these are good things to be engaging in and to think about. So let's chat about them. I've got about a half hour left with you. So let's talk a little bit about some components of self-care, starting with physical activity. A very simple goal with physical activity is just moving more and sitting less. Easy to say, harder to do when many of us are working virtually and maybe sitting more, right? So how can you plan out in your days some more physical exercise? You know, there's simple things like parking further away if you're going anywhere. There's, you know, a lot of great evidence out there just supporting the simple practice of walking. You know, so now we're starting to have more beautiful weather. How can you be enjoying that more? It could be walking. It could be maybe you're physically active and it's running, it's lifting weights, it's whatever it is. Finding something you actually enjoy, and then creating a goal around that. Start simple. And I see there's some in the chat here. If there's questions, Patsy, just interrupt me. And then adequate. Were there questions, Patsy, or no?
No, there's a comment that the group was surprised that take vacations was under physical self-care.
Oh, yeah.
And then a comment about standing desks. Oh.
Yes. Thank goodness for those. Yeah, taking a vacation. There's a slide on here about vacations in the midst of COVID too. And like, you know, our vacations are looking a lot differently or have been. Hopefully people are able to start planning a little bit more now too. But there are physical benefits for taking vacations. Certainly, you often feel more of the mental ones as well. Great point, though. Yeah. And healthy nutrition, prevention of illness, intimacy, deep breathing. I'm hoping we're going to have time for a muscle relaxation exercise here. Avoiding risky or destructive behaviors. So, really managing and monitoring, like, I mentioned how there's been increased alcohol use in the midst of the pandemic, things like that, making sure that it doesn't become destructive for you, knowing yourself and your boundaries, spending more time outside, being more active in general. Those are just a few things. Are there any comments or questions about physical activity?
Just a couple of shout outs to people with treadmills at their desks and arm weights.
Oh, arm weights too. There you go. Yeah, if I panned across to my office, that you would see a treadmill and also a stationary bike. And it has, my husband has actually done quite a setup in here so that both of us have the ability to work and then also be physically active. And that's a privilege for sure. So I definitely think there's huge evidence out there supporting your physical self-care. And again, you talk about things like your immune system, chronic illnesses being well managed by taking care of yourself through sleep and exercise. We're going to talk a little bit more about sleep and nutrition too. As we look at nutrition, and I guess I should mention, if there's other like tips for self-care that you are like the standing desk and the arm weights and stuff, throw them in the chat, and we can definitely do some shout outs to those, because this training is going to be way more beneficial when we all are engaging together. That's the beauty of we're not just here like learning from me, you're learning from each other. And like in the breakout rooms, hopefully you're building some connections there too and learning from one another. So if things are working really well, please do shout it out in the chat if there's certain things that are helping. When we look at nutrition, I think, again, I go with the simple, right? What can I actually remember? Well, moving more, right? And sitting less is something that's easy to remember with exercise. You can look at the goals with that. I think it's like 150 minutes. And then, looking at weightlifting, so many minutes in the week. That's a little bit harder for my mind. It might be great for your mind. However it is for you. When I think about nutrition, a simple way to do that, to think about like how to eat healthy, is eating the rainbow, trying to have colorful plates, being mindful of my fruits and vegetables. For me, that means like making smoothies, because then I know I've like already met my fruit and vegetable intake. It's not something that I have to like be worrying about a lot throughout the day. Small meals regularly. And for a lot of you, I think as educators in general, things like eating and drinking water and taking breaks aren't always like a highlight in the education world. A lot of times things like skipping meals or not drinking enough water, those are more common. Also, like if I had you like raise your hand, if you're a person who works while you're eating, I'm guessing there'd be a lot of hands raised. So actually taking a lunch and mindfully eating, it's surprising when you eat without doing other things. It changes both how much you eat and how much you enjoy what you eat. So just a couple of things like drinking water, planning ahead, actually cooking. I mentioned that's one of my coping skills, which for some people might seem bizarre. That's kind of the joy of coping skills, is like you find what you like, and it's going to be different for all of us. So I think there's some good goals. Any questions or comments about nutrition as a coping skill, as a self-care practice?
Nothing about nutrition, just more about working out. Some Patsy has a regular workout group on Zoom. That's awesome. And also about the sensory input from petting our kitties and our puppies. It's good for us and our kids too.
So true. Those are great ones. Very, very good. Thanks, Liddy. For this one, I'm just going to ask you to grab that pen again, a piece of paper. I just have a couple questions related to sleep. With a pandemic, with stress in general, sleep has been an area where people have tended to get too little sleep. And what we know about sleep is it's very much connected to your mood and also to your thoughts. So when I mentioned like that hamster wheel of ruminating thoughts, sleep can be a very good way to prevent some of those difficult mental thoughts, or we call them thought distortions, which just means like you're not thinking logically or clearly about something. So I want you to have a pen and piece of paper. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, and I want you to just put why if it's yes and N if it's no. So number one, do you go to bed and get up at a different time every day? Number two, do you take naps during the daytime or in the evenings? Again, just put a Y or an N as we work through this. You can number it if you want, or just do a simple list. Number three, do you drink coffee, tea, or soda after 3 p.m. in the afternoon? Number four, do you smoke before sleeping? Number five, do you sleep in a noisy bedroom? Number six, do you try to sleep in a room with a lot of light? Number seven, do you drink alcohol in the evenings? Number eight, do you get into arguments or work on schoolwork right before bedtime? Number nine, do you use your bedroom for working or watching TV? And number 10, do you share a bed with a snoring, cover stealing, or restless partner? I want you to just kind of look and see how you did there. Do you have any whys? If you do have some whys, I'd ask you to just think about, are there any solutions to that number? So when I look at like, do you go to bed and get up at a different time every day? If you said yes to that, then that's telling me that there needs to be more of a routine if possible. So a more consistent bedtime and a more consistent wake up time, which takes some time to get structured. I'll add a caveat here that if you're a caretaker to a baby or to any age, it could be a puppy as well, to be mindful that usually those are time limited sleep disruptions. So certainly just be aware of that. That may take some time for that individual, especially baby, for there to be a sleep routine. But if we're talking about outside of that, like a typical individual without a child or someone they're taking care of or a pet, that routine can be helpful. If you're drinking coffee, tea, or sodas after 3 p.m., that actually is very much linked to sleep disturbances and difficulties falling asleep and staying asleep. I've worked with a lot of individuals who said, well, I can drink Diet Coke until 10 p.m. Well, that's great. And then they say, I sleep fine. And that's good too, except for studies will show that you're not actually getting as much REM sleep, which is very helpful to you in your overall functioning. So sometimes we think, oh, well, we're sleeping fine, right? But we're not getting the deep sleep that we actually need. If you had any whys on here, I just very much encourage you to investigate how you could improve the situation, as any of these things can be leading to more persistent sleep disruptions, like longer term insomnia and things like that. So using like an eye mask if your room is too full of light, using a white noise machine or a white noise app if your room is loud. Any questions or thoughts about sleep? Okay. I'd love for us to do this muscle relaxation exercise. I'm going to wait till the end though, just because I want to make sure we have enough time. It kind of defeats the point of us doing a relaxation exercise if we are having to like rush through it. What I would tell you is progressive muscle relaxation is hugely helpful. There's some that are under 5 minutes long. You can put it right into Google, YouTube it. There's a lot that will just walk you through it. Calm is an app that has a lot of muscle relaxation, kind of like meditation type things. Great things for you to do that are free, and that will also just walk you through relaxing in a way that is like really easy, even if your mind feels busy and you think you're not a person who could do that. It doesn't take a lot to build a practice of just like enhancing your relaxation. Okay, let's talk about social self-care a little bit. Social distancing doesn't mean that you have to totally socially isolate yourself. And I know we're all kind of in different areas, like as far as maybe your specific county, location, or if you've been immunized or whatever. So we all are walking a different path. So just being aware of what's best for you socially, interacting in a way that is safe for you. Whether it's like, I know for me, my mom and I got really good at hiking 6 feet apart. And so we go for a lot of hikes 6 feet apart. And it's very difficult right now if you live alone and in the midst of the pandemic, or if you're living with someone that maybe you have a roommate that where it's not going that well. This is a very difficult time socially. So just being aware that there needs to be some type of social interaction for you. And trying to be intentional about planning that. There's some great virtual game night things if you are still virtual with those around you. Again, taking walks together 6 feet apart is like very, very helpful just for your mental health. Psychologically, emotionally, as we look at self-care, we look at things like really trying to regulate our emotions. So taking the deep breaths before we respond to a stressful situation, doing something that is going to help us actually calm. Like I gave the stop sign example. That would be a way to like psychologically have better self-care. There's something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And I bring this up because essentially what cognitive behavioral therapy does is it's bringing more awareness to our thoughts. And what happens with our thoughts is they trigger our emotions. So if I think, let's say, I think that this appointment is going to go very badly, and maybe the individual's just, the physician's not going to listen to me at all. And I just think it's going to go horrible and I'm going to feel worse after going. Well, then, my emotions become connected. My physiological response become connected to those thoughts. I'm projecting this out. And so I start to maybe feel more nervous, apprehensive. Maybe I think about canceling the appointment, or maybe I go there and I just think negative thoughts about the physician and I don't say what I actually want to say. Our thoughts can predict so much of our future, and they connect very heavily to our emotions. So just bringing awareness to your thoughts, trying to be mindful of how you're thinking and how you're feeling. And I know that's easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice. Something I do as like a mindfulness practice, which mindfulness is just this practice of being aware. And so something I do as a mindfulness practice that really helped me. And if you had asked me 10 years ago, if I would be someone that would like be practicing mindfulness, I would have laughed. But for me, what helped me like start trying to do it is just, I love being outside. So every single time I go outside, and I kid you not, even if I'm just pulling the garbage cans down to the end of the driveway, when I go outside, I do all my senses. So I listen to what I hear. I actively spend time, even if it's just in my end of the driveway, thinking, what do I hear? I hear the birds chirping. I hear a truck going by. I hear a train in the distance. What do I smell? Hopefully nothing, and the garbage doesn't smell terrible, right? But usually I smell like fresh air. I might smell trees or flowers. What do I see? I see the sun rising, right? I go through all of my senses, and I do that every time I go outside, which maybe sounds bizarre to you, but that's a practice that has engaged for me this actual awareness that I can use in day-to-day life. So mindfulness is this awareness of your senses and what's around you. It's very powerful for your overall stress management. Other things that are helpful, like saying no. If I could see you guys, I think maybe I would see some people smiling about saying no, because I imagine that there's some yes people in the group here, and maybe there's some people who say yes to a lot of things and then maybe later wish that they had said no. So saying no is a very helpful coping skill. At times you do need to set boundaries for yourself. There does need to be an awareness for you of what's causing stress, and a lot of times when you are more aware of what that is, like maybe you've signed up to do too much, you realize I have to say no sometime. I do have to maybe watch a Netflix show and laugh for a little bit, right? Or I need to just like play cards, or I need to go for a walk or go for a run. Like I have to say no to doing something in order for me to be okay. So these are a couple coping skills when we think about like psychological and emotional. Are there any questions or comments related to anything so far?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay. And also just setting and maintaining a routine, focusing on things you can control. Like we think again about the pandemic, just making sure that you're consuming reliable news if that's something that you want to be consuming, but then also limiting your exposure to news and social media and looking for ways that you can actually help in your communities. It actually, when they've done research on volunteering as a self-care practice, it can be a very powerful self-care practice because it does usually get someone out of their maybe their own stress. And so it's something that can be helpful, like especially when we think about some of the like the news and the difficult things going on. So finding ways that you can do what you can do and understanding that there's going to be plenty that you can't do. You can't do it all. Spiritual self-care is another component of self-care. And this is entirely dependent on what your own beliefs are. So if you are someone who's religious, then it may be attending a religious service or reading scripture or praying. If you aren't someone who's spirit or religious, maybe it's spending more time in nature or meditating. It could be doing things like regular acts of kindness throughout your day. Or writing letters to someone that you care about that you know is going through a difficult time. One of the simplest self-care practices I'm very excited to share with you is a gratitude journal. The studies on gratitude are immense. It could even be just like a note in your phone, like creating a little note and then just adding to it each day. It could be honestly just like any notebook that you have lying around. And you just truly take 2 minutes and you jot down. I usually do 3 things each day. And it's not like full sentences. This isn't like a diary. You're honestly, it's like hot cup of coffee. That's often on my gratitude list. And it could be like nice weather outside, talk to a friend on the phone. That's it. It takes 5 minutes. And you might wonder, like, why does that matter? The studies have shown that it changes the way your brain thinks. When you go through a stressful situation and you've had practice in that gratitude journaling, your brain, instead of going to the negative thought, the negative place that it may have gone previously, will automatically try to go towards finding gratitude, which sounds crazy, maybe, but it's true. And it's very, very powerful. You can take this 5-minute practice of writing gratitude and then build it into this changing of how your brain thinks and functions in stressful times. I would also encourage you that is a very simple practice to do with those that you work with and those that you teach. I've done that many times with youth and with adults. And there's been huge outcomes from this practice of keeping a regular gratitude journal and then talking about what it meant to that person. Okay, so then let's look a little bit at professional self-care. Professional self-care could be taking a break from checking your email. And it should be that. You should have the ability to take a break and to not be focused. I recently heard someone say, like, I only check my email when I have the capacity to respond to the email. And I thought, oh, that is really good. As someone who checks her email a lot, I really appreciate this notion of like, I don't have to check it unless I have the capacity and the time to respond to it, which seems like it should be obvious, but isn't always. Professionally, make sure that you have some positive connections at work. Use your coping skills throughout the day. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but like a lot of times we have these great coping skills, but we forget to use them all day in our professional life. So drink water, take breaks, go for walks, See if a coworker, if you are in person, see if a coworker wants to go on a masked walk with you, or celebrate the victory of a coworker or of yourself. Make sure that you are practicing your self-care practices in your professional day too.
Someone in the chat, Patricia, said that she does this daily with her students and that they love it. And someone else asked, Patricia, do you have a specific question that you ask them? So Patricia, if you could send it back into the chat or tell us what your question is.
Yeah, and I can share too what I've done. And I'm so glad, Patricia, thank you for sharing that. I truly, it's something so simple to do with those that you work with. So with the students that I've worked with in the past and of all ages, I've just asked them to write what they are thankful for. So I pick a number, like 3 things that they're thankful for, and we go over what it means to be thankful. And it's usually that day. So they write something that day that they are grateful or thankful for. And Patricia, if you have, was Patricia, right?
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you have anything specific, yeah. Oh, and I'm just seeing this now. Regular workout on Zoom and alcohol in moderation. I am by no means minimizing your alcohol in moderation. So just pointing that out, that makes sense. You are free to use those coping skills. Now, if we are okay, moving on, we've got about 7 minutes-ish. So as we look at this plan, I want to just pull up on the Google Docs. I'm going to actually show it to you so that you can get a sense of it. We don't have time to go into another small group. I want to show you this so that you can have it as an example. Make sure that you're seeing it. Yep. Okay. What I like about the self-care worksheet, and you can do maybe after this, you want to take a few minutes. I know you have like some small groups. Patsy had a certain word for it, so I apologize, I'm forgetting, but that's after this session. But Patsy, what is it called?
Groups.
Affinity groups. Okay.
But they're optional. Yeah.
Okay. So there are optional groups after this. I just want to encourage you though, that this document is something for you to actually like think about. So whether you use this one or you use that other self-care assessment, just as a way to actually make a plan. So maybe it means taking out a highlighter and highlighting some of these things, or just taking a blank sheet of paper, or printing this out if you're able to, and writing like what your current practice is for your mind coping or self-care. Emotionally, what are you doing currently? Is there a new practice you want to try? We can't really get anywhere unless we make a plan for it. So this is really a way to do that. And it helps you stay on track. So I would just encourage you to make some type of commitment after this. It could be super simple. It could be move more, sit less. It could be weekly walks with a friend. I do a weekly FaceTime with my best friend since 4th grade. She lives in a different state. Since the pandemic started, every Tuesday we FaceTime. For me, it works better to have a consistent, like that's my goal, that's my plan. So I would just encourage you to make sure that you do that at some point here following this presentation. Okay, we got a few minutes left. There's a myth about happiness, and I kind of alluded to this, that, it must be found. And there's oftentimes there's a lot of books about happiness. There's a lot of research. Now there's like a whole psychology dedicated to positive psychology, which is very much focused on happiness. And so much of happiness is us actually intentionally creating it. So what makes you happy? I just really want you to think for a minute. What was a time recently where you felt truly happy? And when's the last time you did something like that? Like this kid running through the sprinkler, the uninhibited joy. If you know that something like hiking on trails makes you happy, then we have to create a practice that involves hiking on trails. So weekly, every Saturday morning, you get up at 7 and you go hiking on that trail. If reading is something that makes you happy, we have to turn off Netflix and we have to read, right? Or we have to say no to something in order to just have a night in and read. So figuring out what actually makes you happier and then engaging more in that. When we think about better self-care, we also know happiness, very similar. We see a lot of positive outcomes from this focus on happiness. So finding these intentional activities, right, that we voluntarily choose and plan to do. As we close here today, I want you to just really try and be realistic to your own schedule. You're going to start small and work your way up, right? And consistency is huge. If there's certain areas that you want to prioritize, like, maybe like physically you see because of the pandemic, like you're sitting all the time, you're not feeling like, you just feel lethargic, you don't feel like you're as energetic as you used to be. Well, then let's shoot for like maybe 3 walks a week, right? Or something simple. Maybe it's a walk a day, but it's like a short path. The consistency helps a lot in helping you to just like stay focused on it. You also want to try and think about, is this going to be like a short-term goal or a long-term goal? And how might I evaluate that? I'm talking to a group of teachers, so how to have these SMART goals and how to be really intentional with them. But make sure that you're doing these goals about yourself, not just about others that you work with. Using I statements is really helpful. Being specific, I will, whatever it is, I will cook a meal 3 times a week. Something specific to get you started. And before I move on to the next slide here, are there any questions or comments that I haven't seen, Liddy?
Mick shared that they found a great energizing thing in tanning salons. And there's a question. Let's see. Any ideas on how to stop thinking about the endless to-do list in your head for work at home? Asked Nor.
Yep. Great question. I would encourage you to write it down. And then once, like, really intentionally focus on, I'm going to write it down as a method of removing it from my mind. And then when you write it down, what's helpful is to actually I'll do a spreadsheet that says like weekend of, and I'll write the date. And then I'll have my weekend goals that I want to get done. Then the things that I can't fit in the weekend, I'm going to move on to the next page and it's going to say week of, and I'm going to put them all on there. And it's a very intentional process of, I'm trying to take out that. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like the hamster wheel of all your to-dos. It's tons, but you want to take it out and put it on paper. Putting it on paper is going to help you organize yourself so that you're actually doing those things without just like constantly thinking about them. We don't realize it, but sometimes when we're constantly thinking about them, we're actually less productive than we would be if we planned it out and prioritized. Great question. Are there any additional questions in there, Liddy?
I don't see more questions. Some other people's ideas of what works for them, which is great. Professional massages, great song lyrics from Bob Dylan.
Yes. Good. Okay. Well, if there are any more questions, I can certainly stick around for a couple extra minutes here. If not, I'll just show you on here. I did put a list of like some additional coping skills. I shared with Patsy and Liddy, there's like some really great resources online. If you ever want to I like to think of coping skills as a menu almost, like you're picking out what works for you and what doesn't. There's a Boys Town list of 99 coping skills. And I think it's kind of fun to just like cross it out or highlight the ones that are good for you. If there's ones you didn't like, just cross them out. But again, that's like how you find what you like and how you actually enjoy and find like greater happiness in your life. There's some ideas for taking brief vacations in the way that we know how. And we talked a little bit about like your own students, like gratitude journaling, doing some more like adult social emotional learning or reflection. And then remember that I have some materials for you in the Google Drive for you to use. I did put my email address up here. And like I said, I am going to stick around. If there are some additional questions, I'd love to help answer them. And if you don't have additional questions and you're ready to hop on to go to affinity groups or to be done for the day, I want to genuinely thank you for choosing this time frame to be with me and for putting your time into yourself. I really hope that you are able to just spend some time thinking about yourself because you absolutely matter. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paige. You're getting a lot of praise in the chat box, so be sure and take a look. Just another question more, maybe before we close, someone asked if there are any good free apps for self-care that you know about. Any suggestions?
Yes, I'm so glad you said this. Patsy and I actually had a good talk about some resources too. So, if you're a podcast person, there's a ton of great self-care podcasts that are free. So, Brene Brown is one, 10% Happier is another one, that do a lot with like introducing you to different self-care practices. And what I like about Brene Brown's podcast is it really focuses on like changing some of your thoughts. And practices too, but I think it's really helpful. Other free things, I like the Calm app. The Calm app will give you a year of a free trial if you are, and I have to remember if it's either educators might be included in there. So don't quote me, but it's either educators, I think it's educators and healthcare workers. You do have to like fill in your email address in order to get it for free, and then they approve you and send you that information. The Calm app is probably one of the best ones I've seen, but there are a number of really good. I see someone mention the Insight timer for meditation. Yep, absolutely a really good one too. I would also encourage you to check out your libraries. There's some really good books out there. Present Over Perfect is one that's really good for my fellow yes people that like to say yes to a lot of things and then find themselves never really maybe fully present anywhere. So that's a really good one as far as like being present. But there's so many good resources out there. If you email me too and just have a question about like, I'm super interested in this or that, I would be delighted to share some more resources too.
Great. Thank you so much, Paige.
Thank
We'll
you
go
all.
ahead and close the recording, but if people do have an additional something they wanted to chat about, just stay in. Thank you.
Sounds good.